I'm going to introduce Jonathan Sauer. He's a retired computer engineer who grew up in the suburb of Chicago and lived a few blocks from the Chicago Northwestern. So this provided him a lot of opportunity for train watching. He fell in love with Colorado narrow gauge on a family camping trip in the 1970s. He moved to California and built several small layouts as time permitted, and he attempted to model Colorado narrow gauge in HON3, but he fell in love with SN3 at the 2014 National Narrow Gauge Convention in Santa Clara. Jonathan was introduced to the world of operations in 2021 and is in the process of putting an addition on his house to model part of the RGS and operate. Jonathan enjoys time with family, walking his dog, building furniture, winemaking, gardening, building models other than trains, electronics, and 3D printing. And so tonight is his clinic on making tools with 3D printers. Jonathan, go ahead.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Dave. So I'm going to give a talk about 3D printers as a workbench tool. You can always email me after this if questions come up. But what is this clinic about? Pretty much everybody here knows something about 3D printing, and I know there's been numerous examples of parts and kits that are available that are 3D printed, and there's been talks in this form numerous times by vendors. I'm not going to talk about details for models or layouts. This is about how a 3D printer can be a tool for your workbench. So a little bit more about me. Dave covered most of this. I wanted to talk a little bit about my background in printing. I got my first printer in 2017, a lot of influence with my kids. My boys were both into, still are into miniature gaming, and they said, hey, Dad, you should get into 3D printing. You can print this stuff for us. So I bought my first printer in 17, quickly upgraded the filament printer in 2018, and then recently this year took advantage of the holiday sales, and I got a new one this year. I bought my first resin printer, typo on my slide, bought my first resin printer in 2019, and I've upgraded that one in 2023. And I've been making parts for a couple of kit vendors and actually started making or 3D printing parts for a dollhouse vendor that needed somebody to help out. And as Dave said, I have way more hobbies than time. My wife calls me a closet maker because I'm always tinkering and building something. And so my question, the thought I'm going to place in your mind is a 3D printer as useful as these tools, your favorite tools, a hobby knife, glue, rulers and clamps? Well, if you can use a caliper, Legos, and a mouse, then I would propose that a 3D printer is going to be or could be as useful as your favorite hobby tools. So what am I going to cover? I'm going to really quickly give an overview of what 3D printing is, how it works in very simple terms, and then I'm going to go through a lot of examples of how it can be a useful workbench tool. And then do a quick example on making a tool, and then what's the typical cost these days and the cost of parts. Okay, so what is 3D printing? It's an adaptive manufacturing process, and really it deposits a layer, a material layer by layer. Endless technology. It's rapidly advancing. There's a lot of different materials, PLAs, ABS, PET, that's the material they make like Coke and soda bottles out of. If you're in the resin world, they now have color, water washed ones, which is one of my favorites because it's really easy to clean up. There's tough resins, fast curing resins, there's flexible material, there's med and wood infused. There's casting material, so you can print in something that you can use for casting. You can even do carbon fiber. And there's also medical resins that are actually becoming affordable. So today, a lot of dentists or modern dentists, when you do a crown, if you have to have one of those, sometimes they print them in the office, and it's a 3D printing with a resin that is obviously very durable, and the prices of that are getting to the point where you could use it for hobbies. Okay, so how does a 3D printer work? You provide a three-dimensional object, you convert it to tool paths. It's very similar to CNC, but unlike CNC, it's CNC, you're removing material. In 3D printing, you're just adding material. And so really in a I can never say that word, a fused deposition modeling, printers melt a filament and print it onto a surface by moving the print head and the print surface. Very basic. Not going to cover resin printing. So enough about what printers are. So what can you do with them? How can it help you be a better modeler? I'm having a lot of delay. There we go. Okay, so what makes it so useful? You can do jigs, tools, organizers, brackets, panels. You can also have peace in the house by making some cool things for your significant other. And I'm going to give examples of all of these. So let's start with a holder for rolling stock. So I was building drop bottom gondolas, and Dave Adams was building one at the same time, and he showed me this really cool jig he made for painting and assembling his drop bottom gondolas. I looked at that and said, that's really cool. But my skills with working with brass is not nearly at the level of Dave's. But I thought, hey, I've got a problem. And I build things in batches. I've got 9 of these things to paint and build. How am I going to do this? Well, with my caliper and a little creativity, I created a jig similar to his, but I 3D printed mine because I'm not good working with brass. Well, that led to another thing is rolling stock. Well, my next project was building a fleet of tank cars. And if you've ever built a tank car, you know, one of the last things you put on it, or at least with the SM3 ones, is the trucks. So how do you hold these things and not break the rigging underneath? So as you're putting on the air reservoirs and the brake lines and all of those pieces, and I was thinking, well, it'd be really cool if I had a holder for these. So I drew up a little holder and printed up a bunch of holders so I could batch build all my tank cars. So painting. I wanted I listen to music all the time when I'm working on models, and paint shakers, a lot of them, they make a lot of noise. And I thought, well, gee, I saw this guy who was using a hot dog rotisserie to keep his paints fresh. And I thought, that's pretty cool. And so I printed myself one of those. It didn't work out too well. So I redesigned it and I did it as a rotisserie. So I just have a real quiet little motor that it runs at like 3 RPMs and clips, and I can for different size bottles, and it just slowly mixes my paint. And so when I'm painting models, I can have all the paints that I'm using just always ready to go. I quickly found out I needed to supersize it. And the nice thing about 3D printing is all I needed to do was print a longer arm and some more clamps, and I was able to have more paints spinning while I was painting. A hobby knife. So I have a habit of sharp things, find ways to make holes in my skin. And Phil Edholm made this really cool scribe for like putting grain in wood. And so he shared the file with me, and I printed myself a hobby knife. You know, you stack up all the X-Acto blades. But then I decided I needed a cover because I was going to just hurt myself with that. And then I quickly realized, well, this bottom one is one of my favorite scalpel knives that you can get from Micromark, but it doesn't come with a cover. So I 3D printed a little cover for that one. So, have you ever spilled something on your workbench? Are you willing to admit you've spilled something? Well, I spilled my decal solution and spilled it all over my workbench. And I thought, well, that was not too good. So how do you solve that? Well, you print a base and you drop the bottle in. And of course, the bottles all come in different sizes. But what's really nice is you measure it out, and I can print you know, bottle holders or spill savers for any type bottle I have. And it saved me a couple of times. So about your workbench, how can you organize your workbench? I have this honeycomb structure that I just mounted all my paints. So at the back of my workbench, I have all my paints ready to go, that I can see all the colors, throw them in the paint mixer, and they're like always visible so I can find that right color. We all have lots of tools. I'm constantly printing different ways of holding tools. I've got plier holders, screwdriver holders, paintbrush holders, and it seems like every time I start a project, I decide something didn't work well, or I wish I had one more spot for one more brush. What's nice is I just modify my drawing and print up a new one. Switch making. I love the Fast Tracks jigs. All of my switches, I standardized on the number 6, but I needed a couple of 3-way stub switches. And so I talked to all my local train buds, and they all gave me tips on how to hand make them. I made my first one by hand and without a jig, and that didn't work too well. And I really didn't want to spend the money for a jig to build 2 switches. So I needed to make that. So what I ended up doing is I thought, well, I can 3D print something to at least hold the ties in place and then kind of do it by hand. And the thing that I struggled with the most was getting the right angles, filing on the points. And so with a little bit of math, I made some quick holders for the filing to solder, and more importantly, sand down the points so I got the right angle on the points. So when it came time to assemble everything, the angles were right, and then it was just using my track gauges to solder them all in place. So you can make track aids. There's a couple of products like this on the market. The challenge is what flashlights do you have? Picks come in all different sizes and shapes. So I 3D printed a little holder, and this uses a CAD solution that you just enter in the parameters of what's the diameter of the flashlight, what's the diameter of the pick, and it automatically generates an object that you can print to make your pick holders. So now anytime I get a new pick, and I don't know which pick I like best, it depends upon the day of the week, so I kind of have a collection of all of them. So when you're soldering, lots of things I've printed for my workbench on soldering. Here's my spill saver for the gel. Fume sucker in the center here, that's basically a carbon filter and a computer fan that runs on 12 volts that, when I'm soldering, the fumes are going away from me, not towards me. A little jig to hold wires as I'm soldering them. I have about 4 of these with all different wire gauges. So when I'm putting that dreaded decoder in, or I'm doing some other wiring project, I pull out the spool of gauge wire I want, and I have it all in front of me. And then you can buy this on Amazon. This is a little pencil soldering iron. This is great for like when you're out at the workbench, on your layout, but it didn't come with a holder. So I 3D printed a little holder for my soldering iron. Some other miscellaneous things I've done, 3D printed a little, if you're using MEK for gluing styrene together, I forget who makes this, but it's a little caliper item with a pin, but it's hard to pick up. So I made a little holder that always made it easy to grab, a toothpick holder. Kim wipes, I'm a big fan of Kim wipes for my workbench. They're basically dust-free paper towel type things, really great. And then I'm a very visual person, so as I've been working on my layout, trying to visualize the track plan, I just printed a whole bunch of different sizes, different radiuses and switches that I can lay out where I'm putting my track and kind of visualize it and put mock-ups of structures. So it's kind of at least for me, it was an easy way to build up a arsenal to lay out my track plan. Another project, if you're modeling in the West, anywhere, there's a lot of corrugated roofs, buildings, and whatnot. And I was working on Placerville, Colorado, and there's a number of warehouses that are all corrugated. So, and I hate working with the aluminum corrugated. I have a problem getting the paints to work right and weathering it. I found this really great paper. It's for 3D printers, and it looks like aluminum. Holds paint Weather's really nice, but now I needed a way to corrugate it. So I just figured out a gearing system and 3D printed a corrugated maker. And now I can make corrugations any shape and size that I wanted. Servo switch machines, I've used servos and a little controller for those. Um, the upper right is the first design, that's your piano wire type, but back to my stub switch, that wasn't going to work for a stub switch because you got the 3 different positions and you have to accurately stop in the 3 different positions. So this is just a rack and pinion type of switch machine. In servos, the nice things about them is they stop exactly where you want them to. So it was just really easy to use this to switch a stub switch, a 3-way stub switch. Lately, I've gotten into panels. So with my new printer, it can print multicolors and change the filament automatically. And so I've been making my custom panels. This is my fast controller clock panel and lighting controller, but I can envision doing a lot more panels with that. As also, I made a bracket to hold some of my DCC stuff. Speaker baffles. When you put a speaker inside a locomotive, they always sound better in a box or in an enclosure. I was trying to put sound in this switcher, and there's really not a whole lot of room in it, and only place I could put the decoder was in the cab as well as the speaker. And the way I ended up doing that is just putting it at the top. Well, if you notice, the curve is just slight on this cab. So I made a curved speaker baffle that just fits right in there perfectly and just gives enough room to make the sound a little deeper for the diesel. Back to DCC, switch holders, sorry, not switch holders, throttle holders, brackets for all my various, this is my DCC test board for when I install a decoder. And so I just made brackets to hold all my favorite gear. And then once again, my panel for the ramp meter. So some non-trained stuff. So I started making a number of things around the house just because I had requests. Coffee cup holders, a little iPad holder for when we do FaceTime calls with the kids, a little recycle bin. Then I got creative, and this is a dangerous slope. Once you open Pandora's box, I 3D printed some cute little ghosts for Halloween. My wife absolutely loved them, which led to the cat that stalks my dog. Then I found these really cool little door hangers, and next thing I know, my wife's now expecting me to print them up for every holiday, so I've got to always have a 3D print for something for the wife. So, it makes them happy, but it's also can be a time sink. Which leads me to another fun little project. My wife looked at me and said, "Can you do something about that ugly doorbell?" So I made a little nice southwesternly wood thing, but how do I put it on there? I 3D printed a little bracket so it just hangs up there and it won't fall off. Living in California, I have to worry about the earth moving every so often. So now you're saying, okay, you've convinced me you can make a lot of interesting stuff, but could I do this? Well, have you built Legos? Do you know how to use a slide rule and a mouse? Well, if you know those 3 things, you absolutely can. You don't need to be a computer whiz or even know CAD. CAD helps, but you can do way more with CAD, but you don't need to know CAD. The tools, Tinkercad, it's free and simple, and it's a Lego tool. Just about, I would say about 80% of the things I've shown tonight was done with Tinkercad. I use Fusion 360. You can get it free. It's also can be very expensive. SCAD is another great tool. It's a different approach. You describe objects as like code. So the little flashlight pick, uncoupling tool, I did that in SCAD, which is you just describe circles and shapes and give it dimensions. QCAD, that is your traditional 2-dimensional CAD, but you can scale things up. So the switch jig that I made, I did that in QCAD. And then ShapeUp, a lot of people use that. I don't know or use it, but it's really popular. The above 4 I use all the time. So Tinkercad. I'll give a real quick example how to use it. We'll take the drop bottom gondola paint holder, for example. But you can see there's chimneys and paint racks and fast clock panels. So how do you, there we go. So Tinkercad, how does it work? What does it look like? It's basically a box of Legos. You have a whole bunch of shapes and you have a place where you build them and you just drag and drop with your mouse. So that paint holder is just a collection of red squares, round pieces, which is this one and this one, and some triangles. So if you can use your caliper and you can measure things out, the spacing between, the screws on the couplers, that was, 50 or I was using millimeters, that was 50 millimeters. So, but at 57.5 millimeters was half the distance or double that, and that was the distance from center to center on the gondola. So I was able to say, this is where I need my screws, and then I just needed something to butt up against it. And it's adding and subtracting the parts. You join them all together and you have your part. So would you spend $250 on a hobby table saw? So you can get a good 3D printer for $150 when they're on sale. You can even get a great one for $400 or less when they're on sale. The latest one I bought that it holds 4 spools and automatically change. I bought that right after Christmas for $350. So what does it cost to print a part? Not much. The paint holders, they were costing me about 10 cents a piece. The spill savers, about 18 cents. And the reason they're a lot more is I made them solid, so they had some weight to them. And those switch machines, they cost me about 21 cents a pop. And that kind of accounts for the practice prints that I do to get the part right. And so how long does it take to print something? Depends. FDM printers print time is determined by the size of the object and the resolution and how much infill. The way to think about it is every square inch takes about 48 minutes at 2 millimeter resolution. And so, if their part is like 10 square inches, they 10 times that amount. However, the printers are getting faster. I should update this slide. My new printer is about twice the speed of my old printer. It's actually kind of scary how fast things move. And so the printers are getting faster and faster. Where do you find and create parts? So most of the things you saw, I created myself, but a couple of them I did download and print myself, and Thingiverse, Persa printers, My Mini Factory, CD Trader. There's all these places you can do a search on parts. I want a throttle holder for an NCE throttle. There's tons of them out there that you can just download and print. I'll confess that is one of the parts that I downloaded and printed. And then if you can't find what you want, if you can work with Legos, you can use Tinkercad. For more complex things, Fusion 360 or SketchUp or Tinkercad, not Tinkercad, SCAD are all great tools. And I'll turn it back to Dave if there's questions.